Welcome everybody to Casual Conversations, episode 15. We are a Zoom show that is founded on the issue brain injury professional, women versus brain injury. And because you keep showing up, we keep making more shows. So I'm very excited today to have two people who I've known for several years, but in a different field than medicine. They're lawyers. And you may ask, why would a medical show on brain injury have lawyers on? Well, today we're going to talk about when and why you might want a brain injury lawyer a part of a case of one of your patients or a client or even yourself. So welcome to the show, Bill and Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I first wanted to start out with Ken and ask you so Ken, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Jersey.
Okay, and did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer?
Oh, no, no. I didn't know that until about 5 to 10 years of practicing as a lawyer. I knew at that time in my life what I did not want to be or do. And as the years went on, I was working for the Developmental Disabilities Council in Massachusetts. Then I was counsel to the McLean Institute of Law and Psychiatry, and then counsel to New England Medical Center Department of Rehabilitation Medicine. And it was the blend of medicine and law that kept me interested in it.
Interesting. And when did brain injury start to be your focus?
So along that journey, I was working at New England Medical Center, and another Jersey guy, Mitch Rosenthal, a neuropsychologist, asked me one day, and this is 1980, 1981, if I would speak at a conference at the Medical College of Virginia. And for those who are listening to this talk or conversation, imagine that was the only national conference on brain injury at that time.
Wow.
So what happened after that, and as a result of some of the people who were there, is where we are today. So when Mitch, Dr. Rosenthal, asked me if I would speak on the rights with people with a brain injury, I replied yes, and then asked him, what's a brain injury? And all through my career, I realize and always reflect back on that moment, because I too did not understand or know what a brain injury is. And I did go down there and spoke, and it's kind of funny to look back on it. And I went down, and Mitch had said to me, you'll meet us in the... And I walked into the bar, and I just saw a bunch of people dancing, yelling, screaming, having a lot of fun. And then the next day, they were the speakers before this tremendous group. But how I really got involved was after this conference, when I ended up sharing a cab with a woman who happened to be Marilyn Spivac. And
it's hard to have your life not change direction after meeting Marilyn.
And when I said, sure, let's share a cab. And by the time I got out of the cab, I was helping them with their bylaws, helping them with forming their advisory board, and working with them. And I'd heard Marilyn's story. And, when someone asks you to be involved in an important area, even if you don't know it, but are willing to learn, just say yes. And I found through my career, particularly attorneys, and I think Bill would agree with me, they're curious, they want to learn. Most of them admit what they don't know, and that's why they show up at conferences on the legal rights of people with brain injury.
And when the transition happened, I know that NABIS was I actually don't know exactly the order where NABIS, North America Brain Association, is holding their conferences. And then there was the Brain Injury Lawyers of America. Was that one started yet, or did you start that? Or did you bring them together?
So what originally happened was the original group that Marilyn, her husband, and others founded was the National Head Injury Foundation, which eventually became the Brain Injury Association of America. And those organizations sponsored the Lawyers Conference. And then at some point, with Bob Vogt's help, NABIS became the sponsoring agency. And the Lawyers Conference has gone on for about 35 plus years. So it's been, a lot of now trained lawyers throughout the country. So, we, meaning Simon Forget out of Seattle, Washington, myself, are very happy that we set out to help educate lawyers, not by telling them, but by bringing in experts who would educate all of us. And I've attended all 35 of those conferences, and I'm feverishly writing notes because I'm still learning, and we all can still learn. And I'm sure Bill will get into this, but brain injury cases are just so unique. And Bill will get into where and why you should have an attorney. But that's what attracted me. That's how I got involved, and it was fortuitous that I met Marilyn in that cab ride.
That's a great story. And I have had the honor of speaking the first brain injury lawyers conference. I spoke, I think we were in Houston, and it was a giant room and it's a very different looking crowd than the doctor crowd. It was a different crowd, and I had 5 minutes to go up in front of everybody. I was kind of intimidated, and everyone was so nice and welcoming. And then I spoke New Orleans. I gave a presentation on women in brain injury.
Right.
But it was fascinating to sit there and hear the talks before and after, and hear things that, even though I'm in the brain injury field, I wouldn't know about creating the case and trying the case. So it's a fascinating conference.
It is. And one of the benefits of having NABIS sponsor the legal conference is, at the same time the legal conference is going on, there is the parallel medical conference, and registrants, lawyers, can cross over to the medical conference. At the same time, some of the speakers on the medical side come and speak on the legal side.
Which is exactly our case. We were going back and forth. So what a great use of resources, and also connecting the dots. Well, I do want to bring Bill into the conversation. Bill, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Bill. How did you get into the brain injury field?
Sort of in a similar way. I was a while ago.
A cab ride with Marilyn?
No.
Marilyn rides around in cabs and traps people. It's called the Marilyn cab.
No, but we all have Marilyn to thank for many things. A while ago, one of the things that I did quite a bit, much more than I do so now, was tried cases for other lawyers. And I had a colleague who I had tried a couple of cases for, and he approached me and he said, hey, I have a really interesting case. It involves an 8-year-old boy who was injured on a school bus. Would you be interested in trying the case? And as I sort of did in those days, I didn't pay much attention to it. He said it was interesting. I took his word for it, and I said, sure. I got the file, and it was a case where the school bus driver used to play a game with the kids that she called zigzag, where she would make the school bus go back and forth. And she zigged when she should have zagged, and this 8-year-old boy was propelled out of his seat and struck his head on the window next to the seat and had a fairly serious head injury. So I got the file, and I had 2 months to prepare. So I decided I was going to spend a month reviewing the file. and then another month learning about traumatic brain injury, because I really did not know anything about it at that time. Kind of like Ken said, I didn't know what a brain injury was. And as I started to review the file and sort of get into the medicine and started to talk to experts and research and read on my own, I was like a sponge. I just couldn't get enough of it. I became absolutely fascinated with the whole area. And I tried the case. It was, at that point, probably the greatest experience I ever had as an attorney. And I decided maybe this is really my calling and what I wanted to do. And then I went to my first NABIS conference. And when I showed up at NABIS, I saw all these amazing attorneys, and I was in awe. And I realized that they were the cream of the crop, not just because they were great lawyers, but because, as Ken said, they were so interested in learning the material, in developing their skills, and they really took practicing law and trying cases to a whole nother level. And that's when I said, this is what I want to do. I want to practice this way. I want to be in the same arena as these great lawyers. And that's sort of how it started for me.
I think Marilyn just joined us. I was trying to decide if that was her number. Marilyn, did you just join us? I think she's down there in the bottom. Yeah, Marilyn pops in on us. So what do you think? So what advice, as if we have practitioners out there, we have doctors, we have people in the brain injury field, what advice would you have is when a lawyer who's specifically trained in brain injury should be involved?
Immediately.
Immediately.
Yeah, for many different reasons. One of the reasons is a lot of my clients who have brain injury have post-traumatic amnesia. And certainly many of them are unconscious, sometimes for weeks on end. And when they regain consciousness, or even if they don't lose consciousness, they don't have a recollection of what happened. And you then have to go about proving your case and getting information and doing an investigation to fill in the blanks from what your client doesn't recall, because your client very often is not going to remember what happened, or they remember some of what happened, but not all of it. Certainly not some of the more important factors that you need in order to prove the case. So the sooner that you can get involved, the sooner you can try and surveil the area to see if there's any video footage, speak to witnesses, take photographs of the scene to see if there's anything there that can help you. Because if your client doesn't remember what happened, either at all or to any great extent, you're only left with the other side's version of what occurred. And you want to try and gather these clues as quickly as possible to help your client with their case. The other thing that I think is important is traumatic brain injury very often is misdiagnosed or undiagnosed. And I'm certainly not a doctor, but the first thing that I do when I have a new client come in is I run them through a list of potential symptoms. And I ask them questions about what their symptoms may be. And as you're hearing these symptoms, if you've been doing this for a while, you sort of know what medical experts to send them to so that they can investigate what is happening, what treatment they might need, whether or not the symptoms are related to the head injury. And I think the sooner that you can do that, the better it is for the client in terms of their overall health. So I think for these reasons, you want to get an attorney who specializes in traumatic brain injury involved as quickly as possible.
And what about a general attorney that, helped you with your house or your real estate, knows the family really well, knows, we have ties to this attorney?
The worst thing you can do if you have a traumatic brain injury is to not hire an attorney who's well-versed in traumatic brain injury. It really is a specialty. And that's what I learned the first time I went to NABIS. It's a specialty. And there's not a lot of lawyers who do it, and there's not a lot of lawyers who do it well. You have to know the medicine. You have to recognize the symptoms in your client. When I have a client who comes in with a traumatic brain injury, every single symptom that they have. I assume it's related to the brain injury. But more importantly than that, you have to be able to present the case to a jury or to a fact finder. And it's difficult because a lot of your clients who have brain injuries, head injuries, even if they're severe, very often by the time you get to trial, they don't look like they're injured. They actually look perfectly fine. And there's a way of presenting the case to the jury to explain to them that what's happening to your client and the injuries that they have are not external or physical. You have to try the case and present the case from the inside out. You have to really get involved in knowing your client, knowing your client's family, and get from them what your client's going through. And then you have to present that to a jury and explain. Doesn't matter what the client looks like externally. This is what's happening internally, and this is how these symptoms are being manifested. And if you're not experienced in presenting that, and you don't know the medicine, and you don't know how to handle the defenses that the other side is going to present to you, then you're going to be at a severe disadvantage, and you're not going to be able to really maximize the result that your client needs, because most of my clients have continued medical care for the remainder of their life. And you have to be in a position to be able to demonstrate that to a jury and then have them compensated for that.
And I do want to say for people on the call that are in another country, I was speaking to some people last night in the UK about this. In the United States, you're paying, I think, except for in Michigan, I think you're paying for your medical care for the rest of your life. I had 1 year of cancer and cancer treatments, and it literally took me 5 years to recover financially. In the United States, a heart attack, cancer, a brain injury can not only bankrupt you, but bankrupt your family. They can lose their house. Medical care can take us down. So I think 30% of all the GoFundMe's last year were straight for medical care. So this is this is just unheard of in the UK and Australia and socialized medicine. It's probably also the Canadian system where medical care would be part of socialized medicine. And what is the care for, say, somebody with moderate, do you have any statistics of somebody that has a brain injury that, a 10-year-old child is brain injury, how long, like how much of the medical care would cost? Is there any sort of cost thing you could share with the audience? Did I lose you, Bill?
Yeah.
Or is there anything like, because you're saying it's a young child, right? And you're looking at care, and we know it's a progressive issue with moderate to severe brain injury. So you're looking for compensation to care for a child over a lifetime.
Right. It differs depending upon the client, the recovery period, how serious the symptoms are, the age of the client. There's a lot of factors that are involved. What we'll do is we'll have the physicians sort of predict what they think the client is going to need in terms of future care. And then we'll hire an expert known as a life care planner who will evaluate the cost of that care. But any opinion that we're going to give in terms of future medical care is going to have to come from the treating physicians. But it differs depending on so many different factors.
And Ken, I've met at the legal conference some of these life care planners. Do you want to talk a little bit about their role? Ken, do we still have you?
I think Ken's muted.
I'm switching my view now.
Okay, there we go.
Hi.
So the life care planners, and this is why it's important that you be represented by a person who's a brain injury lawyer. If the lawyer does what Bill and I do in recommending that they be seen by people who specialize in brain injury rehabilitation, then hiring a life care planner is a person who puts together their lifetime plan based on the medical opinions of treaters who specialize in the field of brain injury rehabilitation, such as physiatrists. Now, I go back to the early 1980s when I brought a physiatrist in front of the court, and when I introduced him and asked the judge had asked me, who's my next expert? I said, a physiatrist. And the judge said, you mean a psychiatrist? And I said, no, I mean a physiatrist. Again, a reminder that brain injury is not so well known and understood by members of the bar, members of the judiciary, and jurors. So every case is an education, and for those who practice in this area, a re-education. We have to restudy the medicine and the understanding of what is going on, because it is an invisible injury. And how do you persuade a jury that a person who suffered a traumatic brain injury, who walks, talks, and answers questions, is truly operating at a significant deficit? And that is the real challenge. So you need to have resources around you who can explain to jurors and judges and insurance adjusters and mediators the significance of a traumatic brain injury. And Catherine, I'd just like to circle back to what Bill was talking about. When I interview a person who's sustained a traumatic brain injury, one of the first questions I ask them is, how did they get to my office? Not because I'm interested in how they did that. I'm interested in what they say about how they did it. And then after that, invite family members into the meeting and ask the person with the brain injury to leave and ask the family, how did you get here? How did all of you get here? And oftentimes you'll hear a discrepancy, significant discrepancies, between what the person with the brain injury said and what the family said. And it's true about how the incident occurred. There's studies in the journal Head Trauma Rehabilitation put out studies years ago that there's dramatic difference when you ask a person with a brain injury how they're doing and compare that when you ask the family how they're doing. Two different pictures come up.
And so often when I have had women contact me, they have not initially gone with a lawyer that is a brain injury specialist, and it hasn't gone so well for them. And I think too often women are very vulnerable. We've seen that in COVID with the pay of women, many women's jobs, the lack of health insurance in the first place, the lack of retirement or savings. We're a very vulnerable population, gig workers. We work 3 or 4 jobs. None of them provide us with health insurance. So what type of accidents, where are there people who, so if you slip in your own home and it's your own house, that's not, there's no one in that situation. If you slip and fall in a parking lot or in a bus, or where's the realm of which it's useful to call a lawyer and it's not useful to call a lawyer? Like, where's that universe?
I think, first of all, it's always useful to call. And usually, brain injury lawyers who do the type of work that Bill and I do not charge for consultations. We work on what's known as a contingent fee basis, which means we only get paid if and when there's a settlement. I would encourage people to call those in the brain injury field. Even if your case gets turned down, you may learn about the resources you need, despite there's not a liability case. The child who slipped and fell in their own home, for example, they may have a special education case. They may need resources and accommodations going forward. We may not practice in those areas, but we know or should know the resources available to the family.
And I absolutely do know we had in Connecticut, we had a family sue the schools over a gym class concussion. And that one lawsuit had reverberations, David will remember this, around the state, where it was a gym class volleyball. It was our first intern. And, you know, concussion really wasn't taken seriously until one school system got sued for just poorly handling the case at every step of the way, you know, sending her by herself from the gym after they were doing anyway, it's a long story, but it was clearly an injury waiting to happen. And kids have been injured doing this same game before, where they had 15 kids on one side of the gym, 15 on the other, and then 30 volleyballs went in the air. And this girl got hit and then was sent by herself and to the gym, to the nurse. And, you know, it did create momentum in Connecticut to get so many other things passed for so many other kids. And before that point, schools wouldn't take action.
Right.
Catherine, can I mention something just to follow
Sure.
up on what Ken said?
Sure.
I also, you were asking about type of accidents. And I think that what Ken said is well put, that you want to investigate if you do have a case, because a lot of things come out of that. I think the other thing is there's a lot of myths surrounding brain injury, and you don't have to be struck in the head or have a blow to the head to have a brain injury. You don't have to have a loss of consciousness to have a brain injury. And when I do speak to other lawyers, or if I have a client come in, what I focus on are the symptoms. Of course, you want to know the mechanism of what happened. But the other reason to seek out a lawyer is because you want to break through those myths. I think a lot of people say, well, I didn't hit my head or I wasn't knocked out, so how can I have this injury? You very well may. And that's why it's also important, I think, to consult with an attorney, regardless of the type of accident that it is.
Now it's almost, I just saw Marilyn Spivac has joined us. Marilyn, I don't know if we were speaking about you. I don't know if you heard Ken mention that it was a cab ride with you that changed his life. You want to unmute and say hello? Hello.
Hi, Ken. Hi, everybody. Hi, Catherine.
Hey, man.
Nice to meet you, Bill. I don't know what Ken said, but I will tell you, as soon as I learned that Ken was in this business and we were on our way to one of the very few, I think it was one of 3 head injury conferences in the country at that time, I grabbed onto him and I never, ever let him. And I will tell you, everything that I dealt with 5 years after my daughter's injury, which was in '75, and I met Ken in the spring of 1981. And in that 5 years, Catherine mentioned, what happens if I go to our business attorney, our family attorney? I'm the perfect example of that. Remember, in 1975, nobody knew about brain injury, whether it was concussion or severe. And the fact is, very few people survived the kind of injury my daughter had. And it was only because we were at Mass General Hospital, a center of excellence, that she did survive. But what I learned over those 5 years is that my attorney was great as a business attorney. He was great as a real estate attorney. But I learned and I lost what I could have gained by having an attorney. There was none such attorneys in the country. And I had asked Ken, and we talked about it, and I had introduced him to another attorney in Seattle by the name of Simon Bourget, who was working with the group that was establishing our Washington State Head Injury Association. And I said, I don't want anybody else to suffer the loss, the financial loss that I did. Do something about it. And from that time on, since 1983 or 84, these brain injury attorneys have an opportunity, no, these attorneys have a chance to learn how to serve their clients with brain injury in the best possible way. And I think that all anybody has to do is contact the Brain Injury Association of America, any of the brain injury resource groups, and get connected. It's critically important. And the other thing, Ken and Bill, you may want to mention is that these attorneys who are basically personal injury attorneys will suggest an attorney to develop trust that will preserve in the best possible way the funds that you may acquire through the help of such attorneys. So you not only need a brain injury attorney, but you need attorneys that are fully versed in incredible changes that happen almost annually in Medicaid and Medicare trusts. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Marilyn, it's a really good point, as you know, that one can successfully resolve a personal injury matter to the detriment of their client, who will then lose their benefits. There are ways to appropriately protect those clients, that they can maintain their governmental benefits, have utilization of their settlement funds through a trust, with the whole goal of personal injury law is to give the client the maximum opportunity to recover by maximizing their settlement recovery and the utilization of governmental benefits. That's our role in helping people deal with traumatic brain injury.
If you don't think that's important, Deborah owns her own real estate, her own home. She owns her own van. If she needs special shoes, if she needs special equipment, and I'm talking about very severe brain injury, and also you don't know after a concussion what you may need as you age out. And I think that having a good personal care injury attorney and then taking those resources and protecting them so that you're able to receive every governmental benefit that you can, and it's all legal. So you really need to take that V in the road.
I think this is so important. And because I have been around you all, 2 summers ago, when a girl who's very close to me, she was hit on the back of a moped and went flying, and all I knew were her parents were taking off in the airplane in the East Coast to fly to California to go see her, and she was in the ICU. And I said to them, I know you're trying to get to California. I know this is a severe, but I need you to call a lawyer right now. And I called and I found a lawyer, and a lawyer met them at the IC unit with their daughter. And she was looking at about 14 weeks of inpatient care. And so in the end, it turns out the guy that hit her was an uninsured driver who was driving for it was like a DoorDash type service, and there really were some things that needed to be, they had to see the accident site at that moment, work with the police while they were focused on her in the hospital. And in the end, they settled, and they were able to put money aside for her to help her finish school and set up some things. And it was kind of hard for me at the moment because I knew they were very upset and they were trying to get there, but I'm so glad I stepped in and literally said, you need to get a lawyer right now. It needs to be from day one. So that's where I've taken this knowledge, and literally took me 5 minutes to help them.
Catherine, can I mention something that you just said?
Yeah,
You mentioned that story about an uninsured motorist, and that's another reason why you should see an attorney relatively quickly, especially somebody who specializes in traumatic brain injury. Like Marilyn said, we as TBI lawyers understand how significant the damages are in these cases. And we understand how much money it's going to take for this person to be protected. And a lot of the cases that we handle are motor vehicle cases. And a lot of those vehicles that are responsible, at least partially, for the accidents are not properly insured. Minimal policies, no policies at all, although we usually run into a situation where there's just not enough insurance coverage. And when that happens, you have to start to look into other avenues of insurance coverage or other potential defendants. And in a lot of those cases, it involves municipalities, cities, states, townships, villages, and you have to examine whether or not there are defects in the roadway. And the reason why is because if you do have a vehicle with a minimal policy and there's just not going to be enough coverage and you have a client who's seriously injured, if the municipality did not properly engineer the roadway, or if there's a defect in the roadway, you then have another potential defendant to go after who may have significant coverage that you can then use to protect your client's interests, which is another, and in most states, I know in the states where I practiced, you have to put a municipality on notice within 90 days of the accident. So if you wait and the municipality has any responsibility for the accident, you may have lost your opportunity to begin an action against that municipality. So that's another reason why it's important to seek out legal representation very early.
Bill, let me add to that, and it's, I had a situation many years ago in the state of New Jersey, in Ridgefield Park, as a matter of fact. And it's an example of why you ought to talk to a lawyer, even if you think there's nothing there. This was a single car accident where the 18-year-old driver slid off the road and unfortunately struck a telephone pole, and brought suit against the county because what had happened, and we learned this in digging and digging, is that the town had complained to the county for years of that there were too many accidents along the road. And the county went out and looked at the road and they said, okay, let's repave it. And they repaved it, and my client's incident occurred. Well, I hired a structural engineer who, with their permission, dug into the street and found out that in 1929 that they had crowned the road incorrectly, that it's supposed to be a drop-off, but the drop-off that they created was 4 times what it should be. And when the county came out, they mimicked it, paved over it. The point of the story is this: the case eventually settled on the day of trial. The family was able to bring their daughter home and was given 24-hour care in addition to her home, where she continues to live 30 years later. Bill's point can't be overemphasized.
Yeah, and I testified, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I testified in a case in New York that was very similar, only it was the drop off, but it was a tree. And I just, who would have thought that? Certainly in my time, who would have thought that? And my daughter's van she was driving was fell off of a bridge and landed on the roof on the highway below. And whoever even thought about looking at that bridge or looking at that road and studying that? And certainly my real estate attorney didn't think about doing that. So that's another thing. And I just want to add a little PS. I'm looking at all of you, and I'm sure all of you have purchased cars and car insurance, the whole business. The only reason I had any money whatsoever was because my insurance salesman who was a friend. We were writing new policy. I had 2 teenagers. We had 4 cars. Each teenager had a car and we had cars. And he said, you know, you've got an 18-year-old driver and a 20-year-old driver. I want you to buy uninsured and underinsured. And the whole business on the 4 cars. And because I had all of that, which cost in the premium nothing, dollars, you know, Starbucks kind of money for the extra, I was able to collect a bigger nest egg than I would have, that I could have invested. That's the only reason Debbie had any money whatsoever.
Thank you, Marilyn, so much. I do want to switch over to a few questions. Eve Valera, who is our expert in domestic violence, has her hands up. Thank you for waiting, Eve. I'd love to hear your question.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly well, Eve.
It's a great conversation and I really appreciated listening this whole time. For me, one of the things that I'm thinking of that is less I think obvious in this type of a context is you're talking about brain injuries, where really I think mostly what we're talking about is, I'm getting a feedback, sorry, is where there's an accident and then there's an injury and sort of who is to blame and should we involve an attorney. From you know, the work that I do, they're not necessarily accidents. These are abuses. Now, I know that in Canada, for example, when I was speaking to lawyers, one of the things they said was, you know, this is abuse. We're not going to really be able to help these women because it's not an accident. It's just abuse. And there's no money that can be recouped for that. And so one of my questions is are the laws the same here, where, you know, women can't necessarily, I mean, the most they can get is they can eke out, maybe if the guy has some money. I mean, what are the things that can compensate, you know, women who have had brain injuries that again, may not have been recognized for many years? And then the other question, which is at least as critical or even more critical maybe, is the fact that there is a concern, and a valid concern, that if someone is diagnosed with a brain injury, then they can be seen as unfit in court. And so she brings in a lawyer because she's like, oh, he just gave me a brain injury. I want to bring in a lawyer. I want to get this documented, et cetera. And then she's got all this stuff going. And then they, you know, he says, well, I want to get full custody of the kids in the courtroom. And the judge sees her with the diagnosis, or, you know, like all this stuff that she's got a brain injury. She's trying to get compensated for a brain injury. And the judge says, well, I don't feel safe giving the kids to you because you're impaired. So I'm going to give the kids to the adult who doesn't have a brain injury. And I thought this was crazy until a lawyer in Canada said, no, that is actually what happens, because judges are very, very careful about giving children to somebody who has any type of diagnosis. And so it's actually a risk for a woman. So I just don't know. I mean, I know I've said a lot there, partly because you raised some questions for me, which I wasn't expecting to talk about. And then as my passion with TBI and IPV, that's the other question, but I don't know if you want to address any or all of that. That would be really wonderful.
That's great, Eve, because that's what I was thinking. I was about to segue to. So have you had cases with abuse and battery that you've worked on?
Well, I have. First, it's an organization called the National Crime Victims Organization, who stands for the rights of people with who have been victimized in all sorts of crimes. In Massachusetts and perhaps other states, there's a Victims Compensation Act where you can get some form of compensation, and usually the district attorney's office has a victim's advocate who will help you. Now, if you went to a lawyer who's a personal injury lawyer about this, he or she would start looking at the history of the abuser, what institutions, organizations, or government agencies was he or she involved in prior to this assault and battery, and whether or not they are potential targets or not. And I recently had a case involving a murder at a condominium. And, you know, we dug and dug and dug and found out that this condominium association was aware that one of its residents had been recently released from prison after serving 15 years. He was a level 3 sex offender. And they knew all of this and stopped informing residents and new owners and visitors about him. So sometimes the facts will lead to a conclusion where there may be some compensation.
Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that one of the things that Ken keeps mentioning, and this is really what separates, I think, a good personal injury attorney from the rest of the pack, is when you know you have a serious case, you really do have to dig to find whether or not there's a potential defendant out there. I had a similar case. I had a case where a woman was assaulted, serious traumatic brain injury in a housing authority project. And we had to really do an investigation. What we determined was that there was inadequate security at the housing authority building. And so even though there was the assailant that actually caused the injury, we were able to establish that the housing authority did not have the proper security, and if they had, this person would never have entered the building and caused the assault. So I agree with Ken. You have to really dig and determine whether or not there's a potential defendant out there that you can go after.
And along Eve's question, have you found a fear from the people that you have represented that if they did get a successful case, that they would be be marked as like a brain injured person, like would lose custody of their children? Or have you seen a downside of winning a case from that perspective?
I did in representing an attorney. And, you know, towards the end of the case, we discussed you could win and still lose. That this particular individual reputation might be affected if it became public as to the seriousness of his injury. But it can affect one going forward, absolutely. And oftentimes, and the client controls this too, if a case is going to be resolved, the client can request that the case be anonymously filed. It can be confidentially settled. We hear a lot of bad things about confidentiality because it's often the defendant who asks for it for the protection of the institution or the individual. But there are times when it's appropriate for the plaintiff to have a confidential, anonymous settlement to avoid what you're asking about, Catherine.
Very interesting. And I'm looking at through some of the questions now. Someone was talking about a case that was 18 years ago. Is it state by state? What determines how much time you have to try a case?
To try a case or file a case?
File a case.
It's state law.
Okay.
And I understand in particularly sexual abuse cases, those statutes of limitations have been changed, particularly in New York and Massachusetts. We also have something called the rule of discovery. When you knew or should have known you were harmed, you'll hear 2 years, 3 years. It's state dependent. But Bill said earlier, really important thing. Not only you have to be concerned about when you can file or must file a suit by, but there are sometimes notice provisions that if you don't give proper notice within the correct amount of time, you can file the lawsuit and it'll be dismissed. Mm-hmm. So circling back, that's why when's the time to see an attorney? Right away.
And one thing I'll also add, in New York, there are some municipalities where the statute of limitations is shortened. In New York, we have a 3-year statute, but depending upon certain public municipalities, you have less time to file the lawsuit. And again, if you have an attorney that's not aware of that, you may miss out on your opportunity to begin the case or to prevail against one of those municipal defendants.
Kara, you had a question. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure, thank you. Actually, I have a couple, but the first one that I wanted to ask is I was in a car accident, had a severe traumatic brain injury years ago, and my family lived in New Jersey at the time. And I just saw like this was in 2002, and navigating care was very difficult, to figure out. And Stephen Benvenuti in New Jersey was someone, a lawyer who I was connected to, my family, and helped us, from the beginning, even though my car accident did not have any litigation. And I was just curious as to, in terms of helping these clients like navigate care, there are programs, like I know in the state of New Jersey, there's like the TBI waiver, the TBI fund. There are certain things that are available. When I was in Kessler, if it wasn't for my mother and connecting with the neuropsychologist, Dr. Rondeau, that we wouldn't know any of these things that were available. And so I think that's something that's definitely an issue for people with brain injury. Just the care can be tremendously expensive, and then figuring out what's available and how to get where is hard. And if you have, a family member that can help you and advocate for you, that's great, but you need to know like how to play the game and what to do. And so I was wondering if you do any more advocacy in that area or direct your clients to anybody who can help with that.
I tend to direct people. I think I know what I don't know, and but have resources available and refer people to advocates who do that.
Yeah, we do the same thing. That's another reason why you want to hire somebody who knows what they're doing when it comes to TBI. We very often will send the clients to initial physicians who will develop a plan, and then we will work with the family members and the client to try and make sure that they see the appropriate physicians. And that's based upon years of doing this kind of work.
And what about filing for disability? Do you at all help with that, or is that like, how does that at all file and like figure
I know
into
in my practice, there are lawyers who practice disability law that I refer my clients to.
Yeah, as do we. But what we'll do is we'll monitor whether or not they are out of work for how long a period of time. And then we usually will stay in close contact with the disability attorney to make sure that the person does gain those benefits. And then what happens then, and this is something else that's really important, is somebody who's young, who then qualifies for disability, is entitled to Medicare benefits. And without going into a lot of detail, when you settle the case, you have to make sure that the Medicare benefits are protected, because if you don't protect those benefits, the client could lose those benefits. And especially for clients who are going to have a long period of care, you need to make sure that if they are on disability getting Medicare, that those benefits are protected.
That's a special needs trust, I know, that my family has used, and whether that's money, for me, it doesn't come from a litigation, but whether it's an inheritance or it's whatever it is kind of thing, like that's a good way that I know, at least in New Jersey, that's helpful to protect the client, especially since the outcome in the long-term care is unknown.
Right. Well, that's a little different. I was referring to what's called the Medicare Set-Aside, where a certain amount of money has to be set aside to protect Medicare's interest. And if the clients don't do that, they risk losing their Medicare benefits. And the other reason that that's important is some of the money that has to be set aside is quite significant. And if you settle a case and the client then realizes later on that they have to set aside money out of the settlement, and you haven't made provisions for that, you're really doing your client a disservice.
And a quick question is, so the accident was 15 years ago. It turns out the long-term consequences weren't evident at the time. Is there any way to go back to something where it is 15 years ago?
Unlikely in Massachusetts, if the case has been fully settled, that one can go back. And again, this is one of the things that we discuss annually at our lawyers' conferences, because there's tension between when you have to file a lawsuit and when consequences, long-term consequences may develop. To address that tension, we hire experts who put in front of the jury the increased risks, even though the person is not exhibiting those risks now. For example, early onset of dementia is one of the increased risks that some traumatic brain injured patients may be at risk for. So anticipating that once you settle a case and consequences occur, you can't go back. We even say this in the closing. This is the one and only time she's going to be in front of you. And you heard from Dr. So-and-so that she is at risk for A, B, C. And so you're trying to anticipate that situation and try to persuade the jury that this is another area to compensate the plaintiff or the injured party.
Catherine, can I add something to what Ken just said?
Yeah, definitely.
So traumatic brain injury is a disability, and statistically, people who are disabled, they have a shorter work life expectancy and they earn less money over a period of time. So even if we have a client who has a TBI and goes back to work, we argue and to the jury that they're not going to work for as many years as they would have if they weren't injured, and they're going to earn less money over time. So we still pursue a lost earnings claim on their behalf. The other thing that I was thinking about as Ken was talking is, and this goes back to hiring an attorney and who should you hire. We're assuming that all personal injury attorneys try cases, and that's not the case. There's a lot of personal injury attorneys who do not try cases. And if you are going to hire a personal injury attorney, you have to make sure that that attorney is actually a trial lawyer, goes to trial, and most importantly, has proven results at trial. Because what's going to happen is if you hire an attorney who's not well versed at trial, they're probably not going to be able to maximize the recovery.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm just checking the chat. The questions are coming in.
Kimberly Graham would like to speak, Catherine.
Yeah, let me just.
That's a while ago.
I did see Kimberly. You know what? We're almost at the end of the hour. I did want to give you each a chance. Is there one case of that brain injury case that's the most rewarding to you? If you just want to describe that in a few sentences each.
I would reflect and have reflected back on this young New Jersey teenager who was in the single car accident, whose mother wanted her to spend the rest of her life with her. And as a result of the settlement, they were able to put an addition on their home to have 24/7 care. That made a difference not only for the teenager, but for her mom. And I've thought about that case a lot over the last 30 or 40 years.
I think for me, it's the first case that I tried involving that 8-year-old boy. And the reason why is, unfortunately, in this business, you don't always stay in touch with your clients. You represent them, you get very close to them, the case settles, and then occasionally you'll stay in touch with them, but very often you do not. In the case of this 8-year-old boy, not only has he and the family stayed in touch with me, but I've had the unusual experience of actually seeing how the result has benefited him. I've seen him be able to grow from a young boy to a young man, and I've been able to see how firsthand the result we were able to achieve for him has helped him, and that has been incredibly rewarding for me.
Thank you so much. And I did also want to shout out to Brenda Egan Johnson, who spoke on education and the need to have an educational consultant if it's a child for pre and post injury. So Brenda were waving even though your camera's not on. So shout out to her. And then Marilyn Spivac, do you have, you have to unmute, but if you unmute, would you have some final words before we close out this session?
My final words are to thank Ken and to thank Bill. And there's been terrific information here. And don't keep it to yourself, share it. And definitely reach out. I would say every attorney that you go to that have ever attended a brain injury conference put on by Ken and Simon and others, that they will have resources and should have resources and should be able to share and connect you with the Brain Injury Association or the U.S. Brain Injury Alliance or some group. And it's really, really important for individuals to make contact with those groups, because the resources and support, and you learn from others, you learn from people who've walked in your shoes, and you learn wonderful strategies, and stay connected. I think that's really important. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Marilyn.
Catherine.
And I just want to thank our guests today, Bill and Ken, and a surprise stop in with Marilyn. I hope you had a lovely lunch with your daughter and your son today.
Oh, they're still downstairs eating and talking.
I told you not to leave your kids alone. You're incorrigible. And just warning, if you ever get in a cab with Marilyn Spivac, your life will take another turn.
Say yes.
Say yes. Say yes. I do want to just note that we started today our first support group for women of color, and we already have our first 4 members. We're very excited about that. And then we are creating for the IBIA World Brain Injury Congress. We're going to have a panel of women of color, and we're also going to have a panel of professionals of color to talk about diversity in brain injury. So thank everybody today. We'll be back next week with another exciting guest, and thank you, Bill, and thank you, Ken. And we will, as soon as I get my kid downstairs on the video, I will post it on the PINK Concussions YouTube channel. And if you need to contact any people that spoke today, let us know and we'll put you in touch. Actually, both are on the PINK Concussions website, as Ken is on the Professional Advisory Board and Bill serves as a board member. So thank you, everybody, and stay safe. I'm just checking. Yep, everyone, positive reviews on the chat line. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Be well.